Transition, the process of change from one condition to another.
We are now at a new crossroad where change is evident once again.
What does not serve us must transform us anew.
Returning to our original state of oneness and true nature of that which created who we truly are.
Confusion was the way of the past. Enlightenment is the way of the now and future, shedding away the layers of deceit.
We now bring you the transformation of the two who started as one. Our fearless planet never stands still.
Earth has been in a process of transition, and we are not exempt from this remarkable ongoing reality.
Welcome to Transition Radio.
They tell you it's about safety. They tell you it's about finding a lost grandmother in the Tucson desert. They tell you that if we just had one more camera, one more data point, one more peek into your private medical history, we could have saved her. But notice they never talk about the trade-off. Now, they never mention that once you hand over the keys to your biological data, that door never, ever locks again. You're trading your heartbeat for a sense of security that was never real in the first place. It's a bad trade, folks. It's the kind of trade that leaves you with empty pockets and a digital collar around your neck.
Exactly. It's a one-way street paved with good intentions, supposedly, and public safety, they say. They never tell you what they're doing with that data once the crisis is over, or that the crisis itself might have been the goal from the very beginning. Good evening, everyone. I'm Lena Cummings.
And I'm Mark Angelo Cummings. You're alive with Transition Radio, streaming for our studio in the high desert of Silver City, New Mexico. It's Tuesday, February 10th, 2026. If you're just joining us, you've stepped into the middle of a deep dive that we've been preparing since the news of Nancy Guthrie's disappearance broke. We spent the last 48 hours in the archives, and what we found is that Guthrie's case is just the newest leaf on a very old, very poisonous tree. We're glad you're here, but we have to warn you, tonight isn't going to be a comfortable ride. We're pulling back a curtain that most people would rather stay closed because it reveals a pattern that has been repeating for nearly 300 years. We're going to be here for the long haul tonight, so settle in. We aren't stopping until the truth is laid bare.
We now have a significant new development in the ongoing disappearance of 84-year-old Nancy Guthrie in Tucson, Arizona. Investigators from the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Pima County Sheriff's Department have released surveillance images, I'm sure you guys have seen them, and video footage showing a masked, gloved individual tampering with the front door camera on Guthrie's Catalina Foothills home around the time she vanished. The individual appears to be carrying a backpack and may be armed, according to law enforcement.
Law enforcement officials say that footage was recovered after working with private sector partners to access residual data that had previously been inaccessible because the camera was not actively recording at the time of the incident. Authorities have not confirmed that identity of that individual seen in the images, and no arrests have been announced. The search for Nancy Guthrie has now entered its 10th day and remains very active, with investigators continuing to follow leads and appeal to the public for assistance.
That's an interesting proposition, that a Ring camera could still be recording even if you don't have it actively recording.
Right.
So what does that say about our iPhones and our Android phones?
Yeah.
Are they recording even though we're not aware of them?
And what I found kind of strange is it's 10 days in, and now is when they have this footage.
Yeah. Guthrie, the mother of NBC Today co-anchor Savannah Guthrie, was last seen at her home on January 31st. And evidence at the scene has led to investigators to believe she was taken against her will. The FBI is offering a reward for information leading to her safe return or to the arrest and conviction of those responsible, and authorities have reiterated that anyone with information should contact the FBI tip line.
Savannah Guthrie has shared the released images on social media and renewed the family's plea for help, saying they believe her mother is still alive and asking anyone with information to come forward. As of today, investigators emphasize that no confirmed contact has occurred between the family and any potential abductors.
I've been calling it, this episode, the genetic code of a lie. We're taught in school that our history is a series of noble triumphs, a steady march toward progress and liberty. You know, that big word, liberty. But when you look at the DNA of how this country actually expands its power, you find a repeating sequence: provocation, reaction, solution. It's a three-step dance that always ends with the government having more power and the citizen having less. It's like when I train at the gym, and if I don't track the data, I don't know if I'm gaining lean mass or just getting bulky. But in this case, the government is the one tracking the data, and we're the ones losing the mass. We're losing our privacy mass.
Yeah, I love that analogy, Lena. We talk about muscle shielding at the gym, protecting that 124.1 pounds of hard-earned lean muscle. But we have to start talking about privacy shielding, because right now, the Pima County Sheriff's Department and the FBI are trying to strip mine your and everyone's personal life. It's a classic shell game. We're watching a magic trick where the magician waves a red handkerchief that's blood on the porch in Tucson, the ransom note sent to TMC, the pacemaker disconnect, while the other hand is quietly slipping the Health Information Privacy Reform Act into your pocket. They want you to focus on the what, so you never question the why. And to understand the why, we have to go back, way back.
Back to the source code, back to the 1700s, if you can believe it. And I want to start here because this is the foundational myth of American patriotism. The Boston Tea Party, 1773. We see the paintings, we see the brave men in their Mohawk disguises throwing crates of tea into the harbor. It's presented as this pure, unadulterated act of defiance against tyranny. But Mark, let's look at the forensics. Why the Mohawks? If they were proud patriots standing up for their rights, why not show their faces? Why not stand on the deck as Englishmen and say no?
You know, this brings me to the whole concept of the Super Bowl this Sunday, where Bad Bunny and a lot of people who don't agree what is happening to our country are protesting, yet they're called non-patriots. They're like, they believe that this country is made up of only one group of people, English-speaking people, when the entire United States or the Americas are made up of many different colors and shades and languages. And why can they get that through their thick heads?
Well, it's because they are, well, let's not hide it, racist.
Very much so, very much so. And they color it with a different color, and they try, like that Megyn Kelly going off on Piers Morgan. I mean, it's like
unadulterated racism. At that
totally.
point.
I mean, the way she went Latino, like really hatefulness towards us. It's the first recorded American psyop, Lena, and it's a brilliant one in a dark kind of way. By dressing as Mohawks, they weren't just hiding their identities from the British authorities. They were creating a theatrical other. They were using a disguise to shift the blame. Isn't that what they do now? Or at least to create enough chaos and rationalize fear that the British response would be clumsy and overreaching. They wanted to provoke the crowd into an overreaction that would alienate the neutral colonists who were still on the fence about independence. It wasn't just about the tea. It was about the image of the tea being destroyed by savages. It forced the British into a binary choice: crush the colony or lose control.
And they chose to crush it. The British passed the Intolerable Acts in 1774. They closed the port of Boston. They revoked the Massachusetts Charter. They essentially declared martial law, if you can believe it, and quartered troops in the people's homes. And that, right there, is the blueprint. The Sons of Liberty, who were the political radicals of their day, manufactured a theatrical crisis using a false identity, the Mohawk, to force an overreaction from the state. That overreaction is what finally united the 13 colonies. And without the intolerable acts, you might not have even had a revolution.
Exactly. They traded the freedom of the harbor for the unity of the revolution. They manufactured a crisis to force a transition. Now we're glad they did it in that case because we like the outcome, the United States. But we have to recognize the tactics. It's a deceptive maneuver. It's a lie told for a higher purpose. And once the government learned that they could manage the public's perception through these staged events, that played stayed in the handbook forever, and it became the default setting for American expansion to continue to be used today.
And now we present Boston Harbor.
It begins as paperwork beside the water, where a rumor hardens into truth the moment it's written down.
Look at the forensics. Why the Mohawks? If they were proud patriots, why hide? Why not stand as men and say no?
They weren't just hiding. They were creating a theatrical other, using a disguise to shift the blame and create chaos.
It was a brilliant psyop, using racialized fear to ensure the British response would be clumsy, heavy-handed, and ultimately overreaching.
They wanted to provoke the Crown. They forced a binary choice: crush the colony or lose control of the harbor.
The British chose to crush. They closed the port. They revoked the charter. They essentially declared a state of martial law.
That overreaction is the blueprint. Radicals manufacturing a crisis to force the state's hand. This is how you unite a colony.
Without the overreaction, you have no revolution. They traded the freedom of the harbor for the unity of the war.
It's a deceptive maneuver, a lie told for a higher purpose, a play that stayed in the handbook for centuries.
Once the state learned it could manage public perception through staged events, it became the default setting for American expansion.
We like the outcome, so we ignore the tactic. But the process doesn't care about the outcome. It only iterates.
The administrative state was born in that harbor. It moved from the mask to the ledger and finally to the pulse.
Every crisis is now managed. Every overreaction is calculated. The Sons of Liberty simply upgraded their hardware and their data.
You aren't being governed. You are being transitioned from a citizen with a voice to an asset in a ledger.
The playbook never left the cabinet. It just moved the theater from the harbor into your very bloodstream.
Fast forward to 1846. We've got a new nation, a constitution, a Bill of Rights, and a massive appetite for land. We call it manifest destiny, just like the Israelites, right? From God. This is their promised land, right? Yes. So sounds very divine and inevitable, but it was actually a series of very calculated, very dirty land grabs. Look at President James K. Polk. This is a man who was obsessed with expansion. He wanted California. He wanted the ports on the Pacific. But there was a problem. Mexico. It was in the way. And the American people weren't exactly lining up to start an unprovoked war for a real estate deal.
So he did what every expansionist does. He engineered a provocation. He didn't ask for a war. He staged one. He sent General Zachary Taylor and several thousand troops into the Fusus Strip, a piece of land that he knew Mexico claimed. He sat Taylor's troop right in the middle of a disputed zone and basically handed Mexico a match. He was like a fisherman waiting for a nibble in a pond he knew was stuck with hungry pike.
He just sat there and waited. And on April 25th, 1846, he got exactly what he wanted. The Thornton Affair. A Mexican cavalry unit attacked Taylor's patrol. 11 Americans were killed. Now, Mark, listen to how fast the machine moved. This is not unsimilar to things that happened. Polk didn't go to Congress and say, hey, we had a border dispute and some people died. Let's investigate. No, he went to Congress with a war declaration that he had essentially already written. He told them, and I'm quoting here, Mexico has passed the boundary of the United States, has invaded our territory, and shed American blood upon the American soil.
American soil. That was a pivot point. That was the lie that sold the war, Lena. It wasn't American soil. It was a disputed no man's land that he had invaded first. It was a setup. Isn't that their MO?
Yeah.
But by the time the facts could even be discussed, the war fever had been whipped up by the newspapers. The managed crisis had already achieved its goal. But there was one guy who didn't buy it, a young, skinny congressman from Illinois named Abraham Lincoln.
You may know him.
Oh, yeah.
Lincoln stood on the floor of the House and issued what became known as the spot resolutions. He basically called the president a liar to his face. So Trump isn't the first liar.
Mm-hmm.
He demanded that Polk point to the exact spot on the map where that blood was shed and prove that it was on American territory. He knew Polk had baited the trap. He knew the war was built on a foundation of deception, but it didn't matter. The momentum of the lie was too great. We took half of Mexico. We took the land where we're sitting in right now, and we did it based on a false flag border skirmish.
And that's the pattern, folks. The government provokes an incident, claims victimhood, and then uses the resulting outrage to seize power or property. In Polk's case, it was land. In Nancy Guthrie's case, it's data. They're using her disappearance to claim digital territory. They're saying the boundary of your privacy has been crossed by a hacker, and therefore they need to invade your personal soil, your medical records, your home cameras to defend you. It's the Thornton affair with fiber optic cables. And it didn't stop with Polk. No, we think of Lincoln as the great emancipator, and he was. But the Civil War, that was a master class in executing overreach, wasn't it?
This is where it gets uncomfortable for people because so many people love the Lincoln mythos.
Oh, yes.
I mean, he's on the Lincoln Memorial.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the I Have a Dream speech was based out of there. But if you look at 1861, Lincoln effectively became a dictator, believe it or not. And I don't use that word lightly. When the war started, he did not wait for Congress. He unilaterally suspended the writ of habeas corpus.
Explain that for the listeners who might not remember civic class.
Well, habeas corpus is the bedrock of freedom. It's the right to be brought before a judge if you're arrested. And it prevents the king or the president from just throwing you in a dungeon or sending you to Guantanamo because he doesn't like you. Lincoln suspended it. He gave the military the power to arrest civilians, journalists, political opponents, anyone who sympathized with the South. No trial, no charges, just prison.
And the Supreme Court tried to stop him?
Chief Justice Roger Taney ruled in ex parte Merriman that Lincoln couldn't do that. Only Congress could suspend habeas corpus. And what did Lincoln do? Did he respect the checks and balances?
It sounds like somebody we know now. He actually ignored it.
He ignored it. There are even reports, though some historians debate the actual order, that he authorized the arrest of the Chief Justice himself. Imagine that today. Imagine the president ordering the arrest of the Chief Justice because the court said no.
But the justification was national survival.
It's also national survival. It's always national survival. That's the point. We have to suspend your rights to save the Union. We have to tap your phone to stop the terrorists. We have to access your pacemaker to find the missing grandmother. The excuse changes, but the mechanism is identical. A crisis occurs, a real or manufactured crisis, and the Constitution is treated like a suggestion, not a law. And this is where the thread gets really dark and twisted, Mark, because it just doesn't, it's not just about land or data. It's about the transition of leadership. This is something we've noticed in the research for this show. Every time a leader emerges who actually challenges these setups or who might actually lead the country in a direction that doesn't favor the military-industrial complex, that leader is removed. And the transition that follows is always perfectly timed.
Let's talk about 1865. People think that Lincoln assassination was just the act of a lone madman named John Wilkes Booth, a disgruntled actor who hated the Union. But if you look at the political forensics of the aftermath, the transition that followed was almost too convenient for the forces that wanted to see the South kept in a state of permanent, managed chaos. Lincoln was talking about malice towards none and a quick, peaceful reintegration. He was a moderate who wanted to heal the wounds, but the people waiting in the wings, the radical Republicans and the old industrial elites, had a very different map for the future.
Exactly. Lincoln gets removed from the board in April 1865. And who is standing right there, ready to take the oath? The Southerner, Andrew Johnson. Now we need to talk about Johnson. He was a Southerner, a Democrat from Tennessee who stayed loyal to the Union, but his personal views were, well, vile is a good word. This was a man who was a staunch white supremacist. He believed, and he said it openly, that, quote, this is a country for white men. And by God, as long as I'm president, it shall be a government for white men.
So they've been doing this forever, it seems, right? He was a human roadblock. And Lincoln wanted to empower the formerly enslaved and rebuild the nation. Johnson spent his entire presidency trying to veto every single piece of civil rights legislation. He was a replacement president who ensured that the Reconstruction would fail. He was the one who allowed the old power structures of the South to regroup and rebrand. He was eventually impeached, the first president to ever face it, because he was so blatantly sabotaging the laws of the land to fit his own regressive agenda. Sounds like somebody we know now.
Yeah, it's been impeached too.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to ask yourself, was Lincoln's removal the crisis needed to ensure that the power structures of the North and the South could eventually merge into the industrial military behemoth we see today? If Lincoln stays alive, does the deep state ever get its hooks into the American infrastructure? Or was Johnson just the necessary transition to keep the population divided and the elite in control?
It's the coup within the crisis. And it's funny how these transitions always seem to favor the expansion of the state's darker impulses. Johnson racism and his obstructionism paved the way for decades of Jim Crow and social unrest. Unrest that the government then used as an excuse for more police power. It's a feedback loop of misery that keeps the people at each other's throat, kind of like today, while the people in the tall buildings count the profits. Let's move to the turn of the century. 1898, the Spanish-American War. This feels like the birth of modern fake news.
Oh, absolutely. If Polk was the grandfather of the false flag, William Randolph Hearst was the godfather. You have the USS Maine sitting in your Havana harbor. Cuba is in turmoil. The US is looking for an excuse to kick Spain out of the hemisphere.
And then, boom.
February 15, 1898, the Maine explodes. 260 American sailors die, and it was a tragedy, a horrific tragedy. But before the smoke had even cleared, the newspapers, Hearst and Pulitzer Prize, were screaming Spanish treachery. They ran diagrams, fake diagrams, showing Spanish mines attached to the hull of the USS Maine.
Remember the Maine? To hell with Spain. That was the rallying cry. It whipped the public into a frenzy. Congress declared war. We crushed Spain. We took Puerto Rico, Guam, the Philippines. We became an empire. But what really happened to the Maine?
Forensic engineers have looked at it again and again. And in the 70s, Admiral Rickover, the father of the nuclear navy, led an investigation. And his conclusion, it was a coal bunker fire. Spontaneous combustion in the coal storage right next to the ammunition magazine. It was an accident, or maybe an accident that they caused, an internal mechanical failure.
There was no mine. There was no Spanish attack. None. Cero. Ninguno. But the lie. The lie changed the world map. And here is the chilling part. Do you think the government knew it was a coal fire? They had to suspect it.
They rushed the inquiry. They ignored the evidence of an internal explosion because the war was more valuable than the truth. And that brings us to the haunting question about Tucson. Is the truth about Nancy Guthrie being suppressed because the narrative of her disappearance is more valuable to the sheriff and the feds than actually finding her?
If she just wandered off, if it was a simple medical episode, that doesn't get you a 45 million AI contract. A confused elderly woman, which happens all the time, is called Down syndrome, or not Down syndrome, Down sounding was a sundown syndrome. Yeah. A confused elderly woman walking into the desert is a tragedy. A high-tech kidnapping with Bitcoin ransoms and hacked security systems, well, that's an opportunity. That's a mandate. It's the Maine all over again. Instead of a coal fire being spun into a mine, a missing person is being spun into a cyber warfare event. Never let a good crisis go to waste.
No. Look at 1901. This is another one that gets glossed over in the textbooks. President William McKinley. Now, McKinley wasn't a hero, but he was a traditionalist. He was a bit slow, a bit too old school for the emerging class of global imperialists. He was standing in the way of a more aggressive American presence on the world stage. And then, at the Pan American Exposition in Buffalo, he's shot by an anarchist named Leon Czolgosz.
Another lone wolf, another convenient removal of a roadblock president. And who was waiting in the wings this time? Well, the man who was hungry for war, Theodore Roosevelt. Now, I know people love TR. They love the Rough Rider image and the big stick. But we have to look at the man behind the mustache. Roosevelt was a dyed-in-the-wool social Darwinist. He believed that superior nations had a moral duty to dominate inferior ones. He was the assistant secretary of the Navy who had literally been praying for a war with Spain.
He said it. He's on the record. I should welcome almost any war, for I think this country needs one. Think about that mindset, Transition Radio listeners. Imagine the vice president today saying they're praying for a war just to test the national character. That's who TR was. And as soon as McKinley was in the ground, Roosevelt took the wheel and immediately began the big stick era. He seized the Panama Canal. Through a manufactured revolution, he sent the Great White Fleet around the world, like ours is right now in the Persian Gulf or something. He cemented the idea that the U.S. is the world's policeman.
Yeah, the transition from McKinley to Roosevelt was the birth of American imperialism. It was the moment we stopped being a republic and started being a global hegemon. And it was all triggered by a lone wolf anarchist. Every time the system meets a leap forward in power, a lone wolf appears to clear the path. Whether it's Booth in the theater or a shooter in Buffalo, the result is always a more powerful, more invasive state.
And that brings us all the way back to Tucson, Arizona. In 2026, we see the same pattern. Sheriff Nanos is acting as the big stick of Pima County. He's using Nancy Guthrie's empty house as his theater. He's telling us that because she's missing, the old rules of privacy, you know, the ones the Board of Supervisors tried to protect when they rejected his $45 million AI budget last month, are now dead. He's saying, look, because we don't have total surveillance, this poor woman is gone.
It's the executive replacement model applied to the law. If the law won't allow the surveillance they want, they find a crisis that makes the law look like a suicidal pact. They want us to beg for a master. They want us to believe that only a big stick like the FBI or an AI-driven police state can keep us safe from the phantom threat of a sophisticated hacker or a high-tech kidnapper. They're using your empathy for an 84-year-old grandmother to trick you into voting for your own digital incarceration. I mean, how many grandmothers go missing?
It's not very common at all. At all. At all. It's so highly
uncommon. I mean, there are people constantly. You know, it's
so cynical, Mark. It makes me think of when I'm tracking nutrition. If I only look at the calories, I might think I'm doing great, but I have to look at the source of the calories. Are they coming from protein to protect my muscle, or are they empty fillers? The government's feeding us an empty crisis calories. They're giving us fear instead of facts. and they're giving us a managed event instead of a genuine investigation. What is the government doing involved in this anyway?
I know.
We're going to
today. What's her name was talking, and you could see the little camera footage on the bottom.
I mean, they had a live camera on the house. Fox News is like so like
invested.
Oh,
it's crazy.
Obsession.
Yeah.
So we're going to talk about Pearl Harbor and the McCollum memo. We're going to look at the most damning document in American history, Operation Northwoods. If you think the government would have lied to you about a missing person, wait until you hear what they're willing to do to their own citizens in 1962.
The rabbit hole is getting deeper, folks. Don't blink. We're pulling the thread all the way through the fabric of American history until we get to the server room where Nancy Guthrie's pacemaker data is being weaponized against your freedom. This is Transition Radio. We're just getting started.
Stay focused, protect your mind, and protect your data. We're going to dive into the industrial scale lies of the 1900s right now.
Before we do that, though, we're going to do our typical mid-song after our 30 minutes of great information. Gonna go ahead and do Learn, Man, Learn. This is one I wrote back in the day and revamped and remixed with Suno. Great app to make your music come alive.
The natives were the heart of the land. The colonists wanted to wipe them out and remove the connection we had with Mother Earth.
The moon is shining up above us, reminding us of the light that we bear. The stars, they glitter in the darkness, the signs of beauty and all that we share. If we could only learn from nature, a gentle message clearly fills the air. The butterflies were once in hiding and once afraid to let their wings open wide. Learn, man, learn. Why don't you learn, man, learn? Learn, man, learn. Why don't you learn, man, learn? All that we need is to take some time and evaluate our situation. We have destroyed everything in our sight, and we believe we had the right intentions. If we could only learn from nature, a gentle message clearly fills the air. The butterflies were once in hiding and once afraid to let their wings open wide. Learn, man, learn. Why don't you learn, man, learn? Learn, man, learn. Why don't you learn, man, learn? Why must we need to control everything and always harm our neighbors? We justify all of our anger and hate by creating a god of damnation. If we could only learn from nature, the gentle message clearly fills the air. The butterflies were once in hiding and once afraid to let their wings open wide. Learn, man, learn. Why don't you learn, man, learn? Learn, man, learn. Why don't you learn, man, learn? An animal only hunts for a day. He doesn't kill out of pleasure. The trees and birds only use of the rain when all have drank from the treasure. If we could only learn from nature, her gentle message clearly fills the air. The butterflies were once in hiding and once afraid to let their wings open
If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please do and hit that notification button so you don't miss our shows, our creative outlets, which is on Transition Radio Show Productions. We put our music there, and we thank you for watching and for your support. Anyway, we just closed the door on the 1800s, but the scent of coal smoke is still in the air. Let's look at the USS Maine again. But through the lens of modern logistics, you have a ship that is essentially a floating ammunition dump. You have coal bunkers that are notoriously prone to spontaneous combustion. And you have a political class that is salivating for a reason to kickstart a global empire. In 1898, they didn't have the internet, but they had the yellow press, and William Randolph Hearst understood something that Sheriff Nanos understands today. If you can't find a villain, you manufacture one using the available technology.
He famously told his illustrator, "You furnish the pictures and I'll furnish the war." Think about the weight of that statement, Transition Radio. It is the ultimate admission that the reality on the ground or in the water didn't matter. What mattered was the perception of the event. The Maine was an accident. It was a failure of engineering, but they turned it into a dastardly attack by the Spanish. They used the lives of 260 sailors as currency to buy Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines, and affect Cuba.
Yeah, and then they have a fit when a Puerto Rican performs in the Super Bowl speaking the native language that Puerto Ricans are meant to speak. You know, you wanted their land, you made it a territory, but you don't want their language. It was a trade lane. A few hundred lives for a global footprint. And notice the mechanism here. They rushed the investigation. They didn't want a forensic report. They wanted a headline. They didn't want to hear about coal bunker fires because you can't declare war on a coal bunker. You need a human enemy. You need a Spanish mine. This is the exact same logic we're seeing with the Guthrie pacemaker data. A biological or mechanical glitch isn't useful to the state, no, but a sophisticated hacker, that's a target you can build a 45 million surveillance budget around. And they use like the immigrants for the thing, the trans people is another motif. I mean, there's always an enemy to get people fighting and divisive.
It's about actionable crisis. If it's just an accident, it's a tragedy. If it's an attack, it's a policy shift. So now let's move to the big one. 1941, Pearl Harbor. We've all seen the movies. We've all seen the black and white footage of the planes coming over the horizon. It's the ultimate day of infamy. But what if the infamy wasn't just on the side of the Japanese?
You're talking about the McCollum Memo, right? This is a document that every American needs to read, especially if you still believe that surprise attack narrative. October 7th, 1940, Lieutenant Commander Arthur McCollum, a high-level naval intelligence officer, writes an 8-point plan. He doesn't write a plan to avoid war. No, he writes a plan to ensure one. He outlines exactly how to squeeze Japan, cut off their oil, embargo their trade, move our fleet into their backyard in Hawaii, and he concludes with a sentence that should chill every citizen to the bone. If by these means Japan could be led to commit an overt act of war, so much the better.
So much the better. That is the smoking gun of the 20th century. FDR knew that 80% of Americans wanted to stay out of the war. He couldn't just join the fight. He had to be forced into it. So they used the fleet as bait. They ignored the warnings. They let the day of infamy happen because it was the only way to get the American public to sign over their lives and their industry to the global war effort. It was just a strategic sacrifice of American sailors to achieve a global transition. He didn't write a plan to avoid war. He wrote a plan to provoke one. He suggested cutting off their oil. Sounds familiar.
Very much so.
Embargoing their trade, what they done to Cuba. And this is the kicker, keeping the main fleet in Hawaii.
The admirals on the ground, like Admiral Richardson, told FDR that keeping the fleet at Pearl Harbor was a death sentence. They knew it was a sitting duck and went And what did FDR do? Well, he fired Richardson. He replaced him with someone who would follow orders. They weren't protecting those sailors. They were using them as baits. They needed a catastrophic event to shift the American public from isolationism to total war. 2,403 Americans died so the government could have its transition, quote unquote, into a global superpower.
2,800 people died in the attacks of 9/11.
Another.
And they called it our generation's Pearl Harbor moment.
Yep.
It's the same strategic sacrifice we see in Tucson. They aren't interested in the safety of one 84-year-old woman. They're interested in the precedent her disappearance creates. If you can use her medical device failure to justify federal access to every pacemaker in the country, then her sacrifice is so much better for the surveillance state. And look at the Cold War. Look at Operation Northwoods in 1962. This is the godfather of the false flag documents. The Joint Chiefs of Staff, and this is not conspiracy, this is actual recorded documentation. Not a rogue group, but the highest military leaders in the land proposed, yes, blowing up U.S. ships, hijacking planes, and bombing Miami. They were going to stage funerals for mock victims.
Let that sink in for a second. The U.S. government was willing to manufacture fake grieving families to sell an invasion of Cuba. They were willing to kill their own citizens, or at least pretend to manage the public's reaction. This is the level of cynicism we are dealing with here. And when JFK said no to Northwoods, when he said he wanted to splinter the CIA into 1,000 pieces, he was pruned. Dallas 1963 wasn't just a murder. It was a hostile takeover. The transition to Lyndon B. Johnson was the moment the permanent war state took the wheel and never let go.
Operation Northwoods, again, 1962. If you ever find yourself thinking, the government, oh, they're so good, they would never do that, you need to pull that Northwoods file. It was a series of proposals signed by the Joint Chiefs of Staff. These were not extremists or conspiracy theorists. These were the men in the 5-star uniforms, the highest ranking military officers in the country. And what they proposed to President Kennedy was nothing short of treason.
They wanted to bomb American cities. They wanted to sink refugees' boats. They wanted to hijack American passenger planes, and they were going to plant evidence to blame it all on Fidel Castro. Why? Because they wanted an excuse to invade Cuba. They were literally willing to murder American citizens on American soil and stage fake funerals for mock victims just to get their war. They even suggested blowing up a U.S. ship in Guantanamo Bay and blaming Cuba. Remember the Maine all over again.
And don't overlook the mock victims part, Mark. They were planning to shoot down an actual drone aircraft disguised as a civilian flight. They were going to create a fake passenger list, fake grieving families, and fake obituaries. It was a total theatrical production. It shows that to the military-industrial complex, human life, that's just a prop in a larger geopolitical play. If they're willing to fake a hijacking and a funeral in 1962, and maybe something else that happened in, well, let's see, 9/11, why would we believe a sophisticated hacker ransom note in 2026? And now we have Vignette 2, Operation Northwoods.
These weren't rogue actors. These were 5-star uniforms, the highest military minds planning the murder of their own citizens. The plan? Hijack planes, bomb Miami, sink refugee boats. Every act of terror was a coordinate in a larger play. They were going to plant evidence, blame Castro, use American blood as the lubricant for a Cuban invasion. Pure, calculated cynicism. Think about that phrase. Staged grief, fake families, the state manufacturing trauma to manage the public's reflex for war. Kennedy said no. He threatened to splinter the CIA into 1,000 pieces and scatter them to the winds. Dallas, 1963. It wasn't just a murder, it was a hostile takeover. The process pruning an asset that refused to sink. The transition to Johnson was the moment. The permanent war state took the wheel. It hasn't let go since. They didn't throw out Northwoods. They just refined it. If a crisis doesn't exist, the administrative state will manufacture one. Surveillance became the new domestic front. The war didn't stay abroad. It came home to the streets, then the servers. The blueprint is now automated. We don't need mock victims when we can simulate the trauma through an algorithm.
The state is the ultimate cinematographer. It creates the horror so it can sell you the safety of its solution.
The cynical truth of Northwoods is that you are expendable. Your life is just data to be balanced against policy.
Compliance is the only cure for the manufactured crisis. If you stay in spec, you stay safe. Or so they tell us.
The file is never truly closed. The Northwoods Protocol is the heartbeat of the modern world. Always beating. Always hungry.
It's the era of the political execution. It's one of the darkest chapters in our genetic code. You look at the 60s and it's like a garden being aggressively pruned of anyone who wants to stop the war machine or the surveillance state. It wasn't just JFK and Dallas, which everyone focuses on. We have to look at the broader pattern. Look at Malcolm X in 1965. Here was a man who was evolving right in front of our eyes. He was moving toward a global human rights perspective, transcending the boxes of racial division and religious dogma, and they tried to keep him in. He was becoming a bridge builder, and in the eyes of the deep state, a bridge builder is a structural threat to the status quo. So Benito is also that. If he can keep people divided, like Benito was trying not to, Bad Bunny, you can control them. And if someone starts to unite them, then they have to go. And that brings us to the next vignette. The Audubon Ballroom Stand Down.
February 21, 1965. The Audubon is packed, but outside the air is cold and the watchers are waiting.
All units at the Audubon, maintain perimeter. Do not enter the hall unless specifically ordered. Repeat, stay outside.
The orders weren't to protect the man inside. The orders were to observe the inevitable.
Dispatch, we have a report of a disturbance near the stage. Should we move in?
Negative. Hold your position. We have assets inside handling the situation. Stay back.
Assets? I don't see any of our guys. It's a ghost town on the security line.
Wait for confirmation of target neutralization. Do not interfere with the primary subjects. Stay in the vehicle.
They didn't have to pull the trigger themselves. They just had to make sure no one was there to stop those who did.
One man falls. A movement is fractured, and the perimeter remains unbroken.
Wait for confirmation of target neutralization. Do not interfere with the exit of the primary subjects. Stay in the vehicle.
The logbook will show a routine patrol. The news will call it a tragedy. But the silence in this street, that was a policy.
And what does that official story give us? Well, the same lone wolf or eternal feud trope we always see. They blame it on a factional split within the Nation of Islam, but look at the logistic of the Audubon Ballroom that day. The police presence was mysteriously, almost surgically light. Witnesses describe the security as being almost non-existent compared to his previous appearances. The shooters were able to enter, execute their mission, and exit with a level of precision that suggests high-level management or, at the very least, a deliberate stand-down. It's the same security malfunction we see in Tucson right now. The systems designed to protect us always seem to go dark right when the most convenient crimes occur. If Malcolm X is out of the way, the radical energy is fragmented, crisis managed.
And Johnson gave them exactly what they wanted, the Gulf of Tonkin, August 4, 1964. LBJ goes on TV and tells the nation that North Vietnamese boats attacked the USS Maddox in international waters. Again, another provocation. He used that unprovoked attack again to get the Tonkin Gulf Resolution, and which was a blank check for a war that killed 58,000 Americans, which Donald Trump, I guess, had a bad bone spurs or something. He couldn't really participate.
No.
And guess what? The NSA's own historians, they admitted in 2005 that the attack, well, it never happened. It was a ghost on a radar screen. They lied to start a 10-year war. They used a managed event to feed the military-industrial complex for a decade. And then 1968 hits, the year of the great pruning. You have Martin Luther King Jr. standing on that balcony in Memphis. Most people think he was killed because of a speech he gave in 1963 about a dream. But look at his last actions. He wasn't just talking about dreams anymore. He was talking about the triple evils: racism, militarism, and materialism.
Yep, he was vocally opposing the Vietnam War. He was attacking the bottom line of the military-industrial complex. He was planning a poor people's campaign that would have brought the gears of D.C. to a grinding halt by staging a massive campaign. He was moving from civil rights to human rights and economic justice. He was following the money, and as we know on Transition Radio, that is the most dangerous thing you can do in this country. The FBI under J. Edgar Hoover had been harassing King for years with COINTELPRO. This isn't a conspiracy theory. It's a matter of public record and released documents.
They had documented a program of domestic surveillance and psychological warfare. They sent him anonymous letters telling him to commit suicide. They wiretapped his hotel rooms and tried to blackmail him. They knew his every breath. So when James Earl Ray, another lone wolf, apparently, with a background that screams intelligence asset, a guy who escaped from a maximum security prison, traveled the world with multiple aliases, shows up in Memphis, the government's fingerprints are already all over that balcony. The sniper's nest was perfectly positioned, and the police, the locals, were pulled back just minutes before the shot. It's the same mechanism we see with Nancy Guthrie. The surveillance state spends all its time monitoring the target, claiming they need more data to keep us safe. They had MLK under a microscope, yet they missed the sniper. They have our heartbeats and our ring cameras and our license plates under microscope, yet they missed a grandmother with a walker disappearing in the middle of the night. It's selective blindness. They see everything you do when they want to tax you or track you, but they see nothing when a crime happens that justifies their expansion of power. This isn't incompetence. It's a strategic gap in coverage.
And that leads us to the man who took this genetic code and turned it into a global philosophy, Henry Kissinger. If you want to understand why the Pima County sheriff is acting like a mini dictator, you have to understand that Kissinger's doctrine. He was the architect of the realpolitik, the idea that morality is a fairy tale for the masses and the power is the only true currency for the elites. Under the Nixon administration, he turned the entire world into a chessboard of managed crisis. He famously said, the illegals we do immediately, the unconstitutional takes a little longer. That's the mission statement of the people we're fighting today. And the stability is what Henry Kissinger built his entire career on. If you want to understand the modern deep state, you have to understand Kissinger's realpolitik. Under Nixon, he turned the world into a chessboard where an individual's lives were just pawns to be sacrificed for geopolitical stability.
He was the Secretary of State, the National Security Advisor, and the puppet master of all in one. He oversaw the secret bombing of Cambodia, a war within a war that the American public didn't even know was happening because the administration lied about the flight paths. He helped orchestrate the coup in Chile to remove a democratically elected leader, Salvador Allende, and installed a military dictator, Pinochet. To Kissinger, an individual life was just a pawn to be sacrificed for stability or American interests. And that mindset didn't leave the White House when he did. He became the standard operating procedure for the permanent bureaucracy. It's the idea that the end, total control, justifies any means.
And then we get to Watergate. People talk about it as this was great victory for the press or the system working. But look at what actually happened. Richard Nixon was a traditionalist in his own weird, paranoid way. He was an outsider to the Eastern establishment, a guy from Whittier who didn't go to the right schools. He was removed through a scandal that involved a bungled burglary. While that was happening, Kissinger was running secret wars and death squads that were infinitely more criminal. Watergate allowed for a transition to Gerald Ford, a man who had been a member of the Warren Commission. The man who helped cover up the JFK assassination was the one who pardoned Nixon and allowed Kissinger to stay in power. It was a surgical removal of a president who had become too unpredictable.
It was a cleaning of house, Mark. Watergate taught the government that they needed a better way to spy on Americans than plumbers breaking into hotel rooms with duct tape and lockpicks. They realized that physical break-ins are risky. They needed a digital plumbing system. Kissinger understood that stability for the elite required constant instability and fear for the masses. Whether it's a drug war in the 80s or a digital kidnapping in 2026, the strategy is the same. Create a crisis so loud and emotionally devastating that no one hears the sound of their rights being stripped away in the fine print of a new bill.
Kissinger's ghost is all over the Guthrie case, Lena. The idea that Nancy Guthrie, an 84-year-old grandmother, is just collateral damage in a larger strategic goal of data integration. If her disappearance can be used to pass the Health Information Privacy Reform Act, then in the Kissinger mindset, her disappearance is a net positive for the state. They don't value the individual. They value the aggregate. They value the president. They are using her life to buy the right to monitor every other life. It's a transaction made in the dark.
It's the devaluation of the individual, from the mock victims of Operation Northwoods to the casualties of the war on drugs under Reagan. The message from the federal government is clear. You are not a citizen. You are a data point. You are a resource to be managed, a potential threat to be mitigated, or a victim to be exploited for funding. And if your personal tragedy can be leveraged to buy more Verkada cameras, more Fusus integration, or more pacemaker tracking, they will let that tragedy happen every single time. They might even help it along.
Yeah, and they don't want to find her, Lena. They want to find the funding her disappearance provides. We see it in the way they're already moved the conversation away from search and rescue and towards cybersecurity legislation. We see it in the way they've coordinated with mainstream media to create a cinematic narrative. The facts of the case are being buried under the weight of the agenda.
And that's why we're here. We're digging up those facts. We're pulling back the genetic code so you can see how they've engineered this moment. We're moving from the pruning of the 60s and the realpolitik of the 1970s into the shadow wars of the 80s. We're going to show you how the drug epidemic was just another managed crisis, another layer of the net.
The 20th century was a century of industrial lie, folks. It was the era where they perfected the art of the fake war and the stage execution. And we're going to show you every single gear in that machine before we're through. This is Transition Radio, and we are holding the line for the truth.
The genetic code is becoming a digital code, but the intent is the same. Don't look away, because that's when they make their move.
Yeah, Lena, we have to look at the tools they were using back then, because those tools haven't disappeared. They've just gone digital. When the FBI was harassing Martin Luther King Jr., they were using what they call dirty tricks. They were using physical bugs, mail intercepts, and poison pen letters. This was the heart of the COINTELPRO counterintelligence program. The goal wasn't just to gather information. It was to neutralize targets by destroying their reputation, their marriages, and their mental health. They wanted to make the person radioactive so no one would stand near them.
And they did it with a fraction of the technology that they have now. Imagine what J. Edgar Hoover would have done with a Facebook feed and a GPS tracker or a Ring camera. He would have been in heaven. But here's a connection to our current situation in Tucson. COINTELPRO was officially shut down in 1971 after a group of activists broke into an FBI office in Media, Pennsylvania, and stole the files. But as we know, the government never actually stops a program that works. They just rename it, reclassify it, and they move it into the black budget, where there is no oversight.
Exactly. They moved it into the shadow, and that's where Henry Kissinger comes back in. He was obsessed with leaks. He was the one who pushed for the wiretapping of his own staff and journalists because he believed that the security of his grand strategy was more important than the Bill of Rights. He helped create a culture in D.C. where national security became a blanket excuse to bypass the Fourth Amendment. This is the era where the security state, quote unquote, decided that the American public was a potential enemy that needed to be monitored 24 hours a day, kind of like where we're at now.
It's a total information awareness mindset that predates the actual program of that name. They realize that if you can map out a person's entire social network, who they talk to, where they go, what they eat, what their heart rate is, you don't need a lone wolf sniper to neutralize them. You could just cancel them, drain their bank account, or lock them out of the system. You can disappear them digitally before you ever had to do it physically. It's much cleaner, much more efficient, and much harder for the public to protest.
And that brings us back to the Guthrie case. Sheriff Nanos is using the exact same counterintelligence tactic we saw in the 70s. He's leaking specific details to the press, like the blood DNA and the pacemaker data, to create a narrative of a high-tech threat that only he can solve. He's neutralizing any dissent from the Pima County Board of Supervisors by making them look like they're standing in the way of a rescue. It's COINTELPRO 2.0, powered by AI and fed by your personal devices.
It's the weaponization of information. They aren't looking for Nancy. They're using her data to build a digital twin of her life that they can use to justify their new laws. Kissinger would be proud. He once said, "The hidden fact is that there is no such thing as a subversion. There is only a lack of control." And that is what this is all about, control. They want to eliminate the uncontrolled variables of our lives, our privacy, our movements, our medical autonomy.
Total control from the balcony in Memphis to the ranch of Tucson. They want to know every beat of your heart, literally. They've moved from wiretapping the phone lines to wiretapping the human body itself. And they're doing it with a smile, telling us it's for our own good, telling us it's the only way to keep the phantom at bay. And with all these smart watches and smartphones, and I mean, they know everything, how long we sleep, how our breathing is, our heart rate, our sleep score.
If they get access to all that, then they can monitor every single human.
Yeah.
We're not buying it, and our listeners aren't buying it. We're going to peel back the next layer of this genetic code in the 80s, but we're going to stay right here in the 70s for another minute, because we have to talk about the Church Committee.
The Church Committee was the only time in American history where the Senate actually tried to look into the black box of the intelligence agency. Senator Frank Church warned us back then. He said the capacity for total surveillance was already there. And if a dictator ever took charge, the people, would have nowhere to hide. They found that the NSA was intercepting every single telegram, Project Shamrock. They found that the CIA was testing drugs on unsuspecting citizens, Project MKUltra. They found the genetic code, quote unquote, of a lie in its rawest, most terrifying form.
And what happened? Did the agencies get dismantled? No. They got reforms. And reforms in DC are just another word for legalizing the crime. They created the FISA court, a secret court that almost never says no to a warrant request. They built a legal framework, quote unquote, for the very things the Church Committee exposed. They turned the illegal into the unconstitutional, but authorized. They moved the dragnet from the telegram office to the fiber optic cables.
And that's the world we live in now, a world of secret courts, secret data, and secret agendas. A world where your own pacemaker can be subpoenaed to testify against your freedom. We're pulling the threads, Lena. It's a long, bloody, complicated thread, but it leads right to the truth behind the Tucson's disappearance.
And now we have vignette 3.
I think it's 4 now. Yeah.
Most systems don't arrive demanding
February 21, 1965. The Audubon.
Most systems don't arrive demanding obedience. They arrive as a question you answer while thinking about something else.
It's framed as protection, because protection sounds like care when the world feels unpredictable.
Care becomes a pipeline. Verify, collect, store, repeat. So smooth it feels like kindness instead of capture.
No one says surveillance out loud. They say features, support, peace of mind, and the boxes check themselves.
Normalization looks like nothing happening, just a system quietly learning your shape and your rhythm.
And when you finally rest, it doesn't. That's the exchange you never remember agreeing to.
It stays by being useful, until useful becomes permanent.
Before we continue, I wanted to address people that say, oh, you're reading from a prompter. You know, it takes a long time to put these shows together. We work our asses off to put this stuff together, this information. We cannot verbatim quote the things that we're reading. I mean, if you look at a typical newscast, any typical day of the week, you will see a person reading a prompter.
That's what they
Even
do.
the president of the United States uses a prompter with monitors that are on the side, not just 1, 2, or 3, but maybe 4 or 5. So please, Mariah or anyone else who has a problem, no, we don't have the money to buy a in-the-screen prompter feed. We're looking at a monitor. Yes, it is above the camera. It's our big screen. We use it for our TV, but it also doubles as our prompter screen. So we're doing as best as we can. If you want to support our program, you can, and we can invest in a better prompter so that we can read it directly into the camera's eyes. But we don't have that. So please get off our backs about it.
Yeah. And
people read things.
And like
That's
learn
what we
to
do.
listen to the information and know Jesus Christ is not our Lord and Savior.
I mean,
Jesus Christ was the avatar that your religious dogmatic system created to keep you dumbed down as you all are.
But it's just so lame.
I know.
I mean, it's like you know, specifically Mariah comes at us because she thinks that every comment we make on Facebook is some AI generated comment. Sometimes we have used AI to in research and stuff, but we have a brain. We're not reading from a prompter right now. We're not going to just do this show. If we have lots of information to present to you, vignettes and other things, instead of being appreciative for the information that we have, some people have to just
brain dead.
You know, and we've also challenged you, Mariah, to appear here on this show to talk about your bullshit faith that you believe in.
I know.
And you have so far been a big flop. You're just like all talk, hot air, no action. So we're going to continue with our show. We have worked our asses off again to produce it. So if you don't mind, we will continue.
So we're crossing into the 1980s now. Most people remember this as the era of neon lights, big hair in the morning in America, optimism of the Reagan years. But underneath that surface level gloss, the genetic code of the lie was being rewritten into a permanent shadow-founded operation. And Christianity is another one of those lies. We move from the realpolitik of Kissinger into a world where the government didn't just manage crises, they funded them using illicit, off-the-books economies. This is the era of the deep state's offshore bank account.
It really is. If the Vietnam War was built on the ghost in the Gulf of Tonkin, the 1980s were built on ghosts in the cargo holds of CIA-linked planes. We have to look at Iran-Contra because this is where the federal government explicitly broke the law, bypassed the oversight of Congress, and turned into a rogue entity that answered only to itself. Sounds like ICE.
Yeah, pretty much.
They were selling missiles to Iran, an enemy state, and using the profits to fund Contras in Nicaragua because Congress had specifically passed the Boland Amendment to stop them. They told the American people one thing and did the exact opposite in the dark.
So the Boland Amendment was a clear no from the representative of the people. It was a legislative stop sign. But the shadow government doesn't see stop signs. They see opportunities for detours. They didn't care about the law or the Constitution for that matter. They cared about their geopolitical objectives. And to fund those objectives, they didn't just use Iranian money. They used the lives and health of American citizens in places like South Central LA. This is the heart of the Gary Webb Dark Alliance story. He pulled a thread that led all the way from the jungle landing strips of Central America to the crack houses of California.
Gary Webb, another man who was pruned for telling the truth. They found him dead in 2004 with 2 self-inflicted gunshot wounds to the head. Think about the physics of that for a second. His research proved that while Nancy Reagan was on television telling kids to just say no, the CIA and the Department of Justice were looking the other way while their Contra assets flooded American streets with cheap, high-potency crack cocaine. They were literally poisoning the domestic population to fund an illegal war abroad. It is the ultimate betrayal of the American people by their own protectors. And I would venture to say that the fentanyl explosion has absolutely been the same exact
because they're not very bright. They follow the same patterns over and over again. If Jesus Christ is the Lord and Savior, blah, 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 blah. And look at what that crisis created. They didn't just fund a war in Nicaragua. No, they used the resulting crack epidemic to launch the war on drugs here at home. And this is where we see the birth of militarized police state. They introduced the 1033 program, which allowed the Pentagon to funnel surplus military equipment, the tanks, grenade launchers, the M16s, to small town police departments. They turned your local peace officers into a soldier. And they turn your neighborhood into a potential battlefield, kind of what's happening right now in Minneapolis. It was a transition of the domestic landscape from community policing to occupation, to robocops, to ICE agents, to what we're seeing.
You don't need the military to occupy an American city if the local police are the military. And they justified it all by pointing to the drug monster that they helped create. It's the same playbook the Sheriff Nanos is using today. He's pointing to a cyber kidnapping monster to justify why his department needs AI-driven surveillance and military-grade data integration. He's asking for the digital equivalent of an armored personnel carrier for your private health data. He wants the tank for the Internet of Things.
The dramatization isn't just a story. Transition radio. It's a depiction of the stand-down protocol. When the system wants a transition, they simply remove the shields. And they've been removing the shields on our privacy for decades. Look at the legislative groundwork laid during the Reagan and Bush years. They introduced civil assets forfeitures, which allows the police to seize your cash, your car, and your home without ever charging you with a crime. You are guilty until your property can prove its own innocence. It is a total unconstitutional inversion of the American legal system that is being promoted and clapped by MAGA, the conservative, the Christians that are supporting this administration and its president.
And they did it in the name of fighting the drug kingpins. What did Venezuela, what was that all about? The boats? But who were the kingpins, Mark? The CIA-backed smugglers? No. The people getting their property seized were average citizens. And if you think that was the end of it, look at the Anti-Drug Abuse Act of 1986. It created the massive sentencing disparity between crack and powder cocaine. It ensured that the very people the shadow government helped poison were the ones who would stay in prison for decades, providing the human fuel for the burgeoning private industry of prisons. It was a managed human harvest.
Just as they're doing today. It's a closed loop system of control. And they create the supply, they criminalize the users, they militarize the enforcement, and they profit from the incarceration. And they prepare the American public to accept the idea that extreme measures are always necessary for security. By the time we got to the 1990s, with events like Ruby Ridge and Waco, the government was testing its ability to conduct full-scale military sieges against its own citizens for minor regulatory violations.
Ruby Ridge, where a U.S. Marshal and a mother holding her baby were shot by federal snipers over a sawed-off shotgun that an undercover informant had pressured Randy Weaver to shorten by 1/4 of an inch. It was a setup. And Waco, a 51-day siege that ended in a literal inferno where dozens of children were burned alive. Regardless of what you think of the religious beliefs of the people inside, the response was a demonstration of absolute, unchecked federal force. It was a message to every independent-minded American. The rules do not apply to the state when they decide that you are a threat.
It was the psychological conditioning of the nation. They were breaking the American spirit of independence, teaching us to fear the knock on the door, teaching us to accept the presence of black helicopters and tactical gear in our neighborhoods. And then comes the big one, September 11, 2001. The new Pearl Harbor. We've talked about how the Patriot Act was over 300 pages long and introduced just days after the towers fell. You cannot write a bill that complex that quickly unless it was already sitting on a shelf waiting for the right crisis to activate it.
The war on terror is a war without an end, which makes it the perfect managed crisis. You cannot defend an abstract noun on a battlefield. By declaring war on a tactic, the government gave itself a forever war that justifies a forever surveillance state. They moved from wiretapping suspects to the NSA's PRISM program, the mass collection of the metadata of every single American citizen. Your emails, your texts, your location data, it all became national security property under the secret interpretations of the FISA court.
And now in 2026, the national security umbrella is being opened over our very bodies. This is the Guthrie transition. They are taking the infrastructure built for the war on terror and applying it to the pacemaker, your biometric sensors, and your Ring camera. They're saying that your biological security is now a matter of state security. If Sheriff Nanos can claim that Nancy Guthrie's heart rate data is evidence in a federal kidnapping case, then the government effectively owns the right to your pulse.
So the next vignette.
30 years later, the perimeter hasn't moved. It's just expanded. This is the 1033 program, the battlefield coming home.
Jim, wake up! There's a tank in the driveway! Men in helmets! Well, they have long guns, Jim!
They aren't here for a suspect. They are here for the house itself. In the world of civil forfeiture, the property is the defendant.
What? A warrant for what? I've never even had a speeding ticket. What is happening? Once the door breaks, the law changes. You aren't innocent until proven guilty. You are just an obstacle to an acquisition. Where is the cash, Jim? Where are the offshore accounts? Don't move! What cash? I'm a teacher. My money is in a credit union. I have a pension. There are no accounts. We're taking the house anyway. Probable cause. Prove the source of your down payment to a judge next year.
By dawn, the Miller family is gone. The house is an entry on a balance sheet. The machine has been fed.
Coming next, you know.
The government wants that data for a different reason. They want to turn our health records into a digital dragnet. They want to move from protecting us to predicting us. If they can see your heart rate spike when you see a certain news story, or your location data shows you at a certain protest, they have a profile on you that they can use at any time.
You're talking about the total integration grid, Lena. Companies like Fusus and Verkada, these aren't just camera companies. They are data integration hubs. When Nano says he's disappointed that Nancy Guthrie didn't have a Ring subscription, he's not talking about the video clips of her walking her dog. He's talking about the cloud access. If the video is on a local SD card, the Fourth Amendment still applies. They have to get a warrant. But if it's on the cloud, they use emergency request protocols to bypass the courts entirely.
And that seems to be what they found. They had private sector share with them information that they had in their cloud servers.
Yep.
It's crazy. It's the subscription trap. We pay for the equipment, we pay for the monthly fees, we effectively fund our own Operation Northwoods. We are building the cage around ourselves and handing the keys to Sheriff Nanos. And the managed event in Tucson is the marketing campaign. They're using the image of a vulnerable grandmother to make you feel so unsafe in your own skin that you will vote for your own digital incarceration just to feel a false sense of security.
And next vignette is coming up.
The machine doesn't sleep. It just waits for the next command. This is the heart of the grid. A Tier 1 bypass. A digital erasure of a private life. The ultimate override. This isn't a power failure. It's a surgical strike on reality. The system is being told to look the other way.
Check the Guthrie feed. Ring doorbell showing a 404. It's a Tier 1 administrative bypass.
Tier 1? That's for federal requests. Why turn off cameras at a residence?
In the new architecture of safety, observation is a privilege. When Project Shield speaks, the human witness becomes a liability.
In the dark, the black SUV arrives. Project Shield is moving while the world is blind.
The terrifying part isn't the abduction, it's the cooperation. The victim is part of the algorithm now.
They're helping her into the car. She's not fighting, she's nodding. Like she expected them.
Shut it down. We didn't see this. If Project Shield is active, we're not even here.
Jim and Mr. Miller represent thousands of Americans who lost everything to the war on drug machine. It was a transfer of wealth and power from the people to the state. And now they're doing it again with the war on cybercrime. They want the right to seize your digital assets, your medical data, and your identity if they even suspect a connection to a threat. Sheriff Nano isn't just looking for Nancy, he's looking for the Jim Millers of the digital age, people he can squeeze for more funding and more control.
It is a genetic code that has mutated into a digital code. From the land grabs of the 1800s, to the asset seizures of the 80s, to the data dragnets of 2026. The target is always your autonomy. The weapon is always fear. And the goal is always a transition to a world where the government knows more about you than you know about yourself.
We're holding the flashlight on this labyrinth, folks. In the next segment, we're going to look at Guthrie's anomalies, the specific forensic details that prove this isn't a kidnapping, but a managed event. We're going to talk about the blood DNA confirmed in records time, the secret roof camera, and the Bitcoin ransom that reads like a Hollywood script.
I'm going to show you how they are furnishing the pictures just like Hearst did in 1898. Don't move. This is Transition Radio, and we are coming for the truth.
We have spent the last few segments building the foundation. We've shown you that the federal government and their local lackeys have a 300-year history of using fabricated crisis to strip away your freedoms. From the Mohawk disguise of the 1770s to the CIA cargo planes in the 1980s, the blueprint is the exact same. Provocation, reaction, solution. But now, Transition Radio, we have to look at the solution. They are trying to sell us right here in Tucson. We have to look at the Guthrie anomalies.
And they're everywhere, Mark. If you look at this case with a forensic eye, the way I look at my training records to see if my power is ready on my rower or something, the narrative being pushed by Sheriff Nanos and the media feels less like a police report and more like a Hollywood script designed to justify a massive budget expansion. Let's start with the most glaring anomaly, the blood DNA confirmed.
This is where the digital Thornton affair begins. Sheriff Nanos goes on television and tells the public that they found blood on the porch of Nancy Guthrie's ranch. Now, in a normal investigation, DNA sequencing takes days, if not weeks, especially in a county system that is perpetually backlogged. But in the Guthrie case, they had a positive DNA match back within hours.
Hours. Think about that. Unless they already had her genetic profile, her specific one, sitting in a preloaded database, or unless the entire lab was cleared for this specific event, that turnaround is physically impossible under standard operating procedure. It suggests a level of preparedness that is terrifying. They wanted that blood to be hers before the public even had time to ask questions. It's the American blood on American soil lie for the genetic age.
And then there's the vehicle. They tell us her SUV was found abandoned. But here's the kicker. The FBI didn't seize the vehicle for forensic processing until 7 days after she disappeared. If this was a high-stake kidnapping of a vulnerable senior with a heart condition, why wait a week to check for prints, fibers, or digital signatures in the car?
Because they already knew what was in the car, Mark. Or more accurately, they knew what wasn't in it. They didn't need the evidence to find her. They needed the delay to build the narrative. While that car sat in the sun, they were feeding the press stories about a sophisticated hacker who could bypass her Ring camera.
Let's talk about that camera. Nanos has been very vocal about his disappointment that her Ring camera was offline. He's using it as a talking point to shame the board of supervisors for not funding the Fusus integration. But we have a report of a secret roof camera at the Guthrie Ranch, a camera that wasn't part of the consumer Ring system. Why hasn't that footage been released? Why is the sheriff department pretending only the offline camera existed?
It's the selective presentation of evidence. Just like the Spanish mines, quote unquote, on the USS Maine, they ignore the coal bunker fire and point to the mine. They ignore the working roof camera and point to the offline Ring camera. It is a manufactured gap in the record to make you feel vulnerable. They want you to think, if a hacker can turn off her camera, I'm not safe unless the police are monitoring the feed 24/7.
Yeah.
We already did that.
Okay.
That's okay.
So the tier 1 bypass isn't a theory, then. It's the reality of the cloud world we live in. We pay for these devices, we put them on our houses, but the back door is always open for the people with the right clearance. And Sheriff Nanos wants that clearance to be permanent. He wants to move from emergency requests to live stream access. He wants to turn every home in Pima County into a node on his grid.
And he's using the Bitcoin ransom to seal the deal. This is the most Hollywood part of the whole story. A ransom note sent to TMZ, not to her husband, not to her daughter,
no,
to a celebrity gossip site. It's designed for maximum public consumption. It's yellow journalism 2.0. They want the public to be part of the investigation so we feel a personal stake in the outcome, sort of like what happened with Brian Laundrie and Gabby Petito.
That was, yeah. And notice the amount. They're asking for a cyber currency payment. Why? Because it sounds high tech. It sounds scary. It implies a level of sophistication that justifies bringing in the FBI cyber division. It moves the case from a local missing person search to a national security event. It's the McCollum memo strategy. Create an overact that forces the public to accept the intervention.
It's the digital Thornton affair. Just like Polk sent soldiers to the Rio Grande to get shot at so he could take California, they're using Nancy Guthrie's data to get hacked so they can take our privacy. They're baiting a trap with an 84-year-old grandmother, and the solution they're proposing, the Health Information Privacy Reform Act, is the Tonkin Gulf Resolution for our bodies.
The bill would allow federal agencies to access real-time biometric data in cases of life-threatening emergencies. But as we've seen tonight, they can manufacture an emergency whenever they want. They can turn off a camera, leak a ransom note, and then claim they need your pacemaker data to find the victim. Once that door is open, it never closes. They will be monitoring your heart rate for pre-crime indicators before this decade is out.
When I'm out there rowing, trying to keep my heart rate in zone 2, I'm doing it to stay athletic, to protect my muscle mass. I'm the one in control of that data, but under this new act, that data is no longer mine. It belongs to the crisis managers, quote unquote. If I have a spike in my heart rate because I'm angry at a news report, am I a medical emergency? Am I a threat? The potential for abuse is infinite.
It's like the movie Tom Cruise made, Thought Police, you know? Let's pull the thread on the FBI involvement here. Usually the feds don't get involved in a local missing person case for at least 48 to 72 hours, unless there's a clear federal crime. But they were on the ground at the Guthrie Ranch within 6 hours. What was the federal trigger? And why were the president and everybody talking about it? It was like, why? Wait, this is a local little.
I know.
Yeah.
It's like people go missing all the time.
All the time.
The trigger was the pacemaker, Mark. That's the detail everyone's missing. Because the pacemaker is a medical device that transmits data across state lines to a server in Minnesota. The feds claim interstate commerce jurisdiction immediately. They didn't need a kidnapping to get in. They used the data stream as their front door. It's a jurisdictional false flag.
So they use the technology itself to bypass the local sheriff limitation. And then they coordinated with nanos to push the hacker narrative. Think about the hardware, Lina. We're talking about an encrypted medical device. The idea that a random kidnapper has the signal jamming equipment, to mute a pacemaker while simultaneously hacking a Ring cloud server, it's 007 stuff. It's not Silver City criminal stuff.
Exactly. And that's the pictures that they are furnishing for us. They're presenting a villain so sophisticated, the only logical response is to hand over the keys to the entire digital kingdom. It's the strategy of tension. If you make the enemy look like a technological god, the public will accept technological slavery just to have a chance at fighting back.
And what about the family? We've heard nothing from the husband or the daughter in 3 days. The sheriff says they are sequestered to their own protection, for their own protection, of course. Sequestered, or are they silenced? In every other missing person case, the family is on every news channel pleading for a return here. But here we have silence.
It's information management, Mark. They can't have the husband accidentally mentioning that Nancy was planning to leave him or that she'd been having glitches with her device for weeks. They need a clean cinematic abduction. Any human complexity ruins the false flag. They need her to be a saintly victim, and they need the kidnapper to be a digital demon.
This is the same pruning of facts we saw in the 60s. They remove the noise so they can broadcast the signal they want. And the signal right now is give us the data. They are broadcasting it on every frequency.
It makes me want to pull my Garmin off and just throw it in the Gila River. If my fitness data is the hook that they use to catch my privacy, then the trade isn't worth it. But that's what they want. They want us to feel like we have to choose between our health and our freedom. But on Transition Radio, we say you can have both. You must have both.
And then we need to dive deeper into this Project Shield mentioned from the tech log we dramatized. If that's a real Pima County protocol, it means they've already integrated the Fusus grid with federal biometric database. We're not just talking about cameras. We're talking about shielding the government from public oversight while they peer into our homes. Why was the code name SHIELD? Who are they shielding?
They're shielding themselves from the truth, Mark. In my tracking, when I shield the data about my oatmeal that I take from my Garmin, or I'm only lying to myself about my progress. But when the government shields the source code of their surveillance, they're lying to the entire electorate. They're using Nancy Guthrie as a human shield for their legislative data. If you criticize the bill, they call you heartless. If you question the data, they say you're siding with the kidnappers. It's a classical emotional narcissistic blockade.
And that's what they do. And the TMC connection, well, let's really look at the TMC. This is based in Los Angeles. Nancy's in Tucson. Why would a sophisticated hacker send a ransom note to a celebrity gossip site in a different time zone? It's for the viral effect. They wanted the story to break in the most public and unverified way possible so the FBI could step in and verify it. It bypassed the local sheriff department internal filters and goes straight to the national stage. It's a manufactured media event, just like Hearst Pictures for the Spanish-American War.
It's search and rescue theater. They're spending millions on drones and infrared sensors in the desert, but they won't even release the footage from the roof camera that was actually working that night. They want the public to see the high-tech search because it looks good on the 6 o'clock news. It builds a case for the $45 million budget. They're showing us the muscle of the state, but they are hiding the brain of the operation.
Yeah, we're calling it out, Tucson. We see the strings. We see the genetic code of the lie unfolding in the Arizona sun. We're not going to let them use this tragedy to lock the digital cage. We're the muscle shield for the Constitution, and we are holding the line.
The transition is happening in real time. Stay focused right here in the desert. We are the muscle shield for the truth. Don't blink.
Here we are, Linda. We've pulled a thread from the Boston Harbor in 1773 to the blood-soaked balconies of the 60s, the crack houses in the 80s, and the smoking ruins of 9/11. And it all leads to this moment, Tuesday, February 10th, 2026. Monday night ransom deadline for Nancy Guthrie has passed. And as we expected, the sophisticated hackers haven't made a sound because they aren't meant to talk. They are meant to be a ghost in a machine that justifies a new kind of exorcism.
Exactly. And while the mainstream feeds are full of breaking news about the hunt for a digital ghost, we need to talk about the actual script being followed. The research we've been analyzing connects every single dot we've touched tonight. It's the work of Yuri Bezmenov, the KGB defector who told us in the 80s exactly how a nation is destroyed from the inside out. He called it ideological subversion. And if you look at his 4 stages, demoralization, destabilization, crisis, and normalization, you'll realize we aren't just watching a missing persons case. We're watching the final stage of a 50-year plan.
Bezmenov's warning was chilling because it wasn't about tanks or missiles. It was about the mind. He said that 85% of the KGB efforts was spent on changing the perception of reality. He wanted to make it so that no one could come to sensible conclusion in the interest of defending themselves. And look at what Ayaan Hirsi Ali says in that same context. She calls out the subversion of the Western value principles like the rule of law, personal responsibility, and liberty. She sees the same 4-step program being carried out right now, not by the Soviet Union, but by what she calls the twin threats of culture Marxism and the expansionist political Islam.
It's the red-green alliance, Mark. And whether you look at it through the lens of Hirsi Ali, who sees the threat in the anti-Israel, anti-American protests on elite campuses, or through the lens of Dunham and Lakoff, who see it in the infiltration of the political right, the result is the same. The population is demoralized. We have now a generation of citizens who can no longer recognize when their own history and values are being dismantled. We've been told that our physical and digital autonomy is actually a form of oppression or privilege.
And that leads directly to stage 2, destabilization. This is where they exploit existing division class, ethnicity, identity to create a state of perpetual friction. Hirsi Ali notes that subversion often goes unnoticed until it's too late because it's a mood, a vibe. It's the sense that the world is rumbling like a volcano, and then the crisis hits.
And the crisis is where we're sitting right now in Tucson. Nancy Guthrie isn't just a missing woman. She's the manufactured crisis, stage 3. She is the catalyst. As the article states, this stage is characterized by significant upheaval that leads to a state of emergency. They use Nancy's empty house, phantom ransom note to create high uncertainty and fear. They make the public feel so vulnerable that we stop asking for evidence and start begging for order.
And order is stage 4, normalization. This is the most dangerous part of the Bezmenov formula. Normalization is when the subverter establishes a new status quo. The oppressive new conditions, like the federal government having a backdoor into your medical data or your home cameras, become normal. They tell you they're doing it to restore order, but in reality, they're just solidifying control. Kind of like what's happening on the wall right now. You know, this whole concept with immigration and everything else is for your protection, right? The Health Information Privacy Reforms Act that they've pushing through the House this week, that is the normalization.
It's so surgical, Mark. Hersey Ali mentions how she fled to America to find the freedom her father taught her about, the rule of law, the toleration of difference, and now she sees those values being eaten from within. When I see the Board of Supervisors being shamed for wanting to protect our privacy, I see the demoralization of the very concept of the Fourth Amendment. They're making it shameful to want to own your own data.
It's a totalitarian termite infestation. To borrow a phrase from the research, they are hollowing out the structure while the house still looks standing. And the most heartbreaking part of Hearst Allies' analysis is her observation that many Americans refuse to believe that anything was actually wrong until the October 7th attack pulled back the curtain. She saw the revolution burst into view on the streets of London and the campuses of Yale.
And we're seeing the Tucson version of that revolution right now. It's a revolution of management. It's the idea that our Western values, your right to be left alone, your right to keep your own biometric data private, are colonialist obstacles to a safer society. They're reframing the victim as a perpetrator. If you want privacy, you're the perpetrator of the next tragedy because you prevented the police from having the tools they needed. It is pure Orwellian subversion.
We have to talk about the elephant in the room, Lena. The research you found is blunt about it. Dunham and Lakoff aren't just saying Russia is meddling. They're saying the leadership of the GOP has been strategically compromised. They look at the Smirnov revelation, the whatever the hell they want comments regarding NATO, and they see a president who isn't just an ally of the subverter. They see a president who might be the primary tool of the subversion itself.
It's the ultimate active measure, Mark. If you can position a figurehead who is so polarizing that half the country sees him as a savior and the other half sees him as a devil, you've achieved the perfect destabilization. While we're arguing about whether the 47th president is a Russian asset, foundations of the republic are being turned into sawdust.
Exactly. Think about the imperial presidency, the Cortellessa described in Time magazine, the plan to build detention camps, to deploy the military inland, to fire U.S. attorneys who don't carry out personal orders. These aren't Western democratic values. These are the values of regime Bezmenov fled. If the leader is compromised, then every crisis, including the one in Tucson, becomes an opportunity to solidify that imperial control.
And that's the twist in the Guthrie case. Is the federal trigger, the FBI jumping in within 6 hours, really about finding a grandmother? Or is it about the president having a direct, real-time biometric line into the lives of every citizen? If the president is a tool of an external subverter, then the surveillance grid isn't for our safety. It's for our normalization into a satellite state of global authoritarian order.
It's the genetic code coming full circle, folks. We started with the Mohawk disguise to start a revolution. Now we have a patriot disguise being used to end one. They use the flag to wrap the chains. They use the America First slogan to ensure we are the last to know we've been conquered from within.
Bezmenov said the subverter's ability to keep us in the dark is key. If the person at the very top is the part of the subversion, the darkness is total. But the one thing they can't account is it's a mind that refuses to stop questioning. We see the Smirnov lies. We see the Project Shield overrides. We see the strings leading all the way back to Moscow. And we are not going to look away.
Lena, the article mentions that Dunham and Lakoff believe the right is the primary threat. Citing things like the killing of the bipartisan border bill, they see the GOP as the vehicle for Putin's subversion. But Hersey Ally argues that the left's embrace of ideologies that cast Western values as colonialist is the true dagger in the heart of democracy. Who's right?
They're both right. That's the brilliance of the destabilization phase. The subverter doesn't pick a side. They fund both sides of the fracture. They want us fighting over whether the threat is coming from Moscow or from a university campus. While we're busy pointing fingers, the normalization happens in the background. Surveillance grid doesn't care if you're a Republican or a Democrat. It just wants your data. It's a pincher movement on the American soul.
It's a flush for the collective consciousness. It keeps us occupied while the Project Shield and the Fusus grid are installed. They want us to stay in that high-intensity emotional zone so we don't notice the digital handcuffs being snapped into place.
And that's the Bezmenov vibe, that feeling that something is fundamentally wrong. But you can't quite put your finger on it. It's because the perception has been shifted. We've been told that to be a good citizen, we have to be transparent to the state. But true citizenship requires the state to be transparent to the people. We've inverted the entire hierarchy of authority.
Hersey Alley talks about antics of protesters with fear and trembling because she's seen where this leads. She lived through the Somali Civil War. She knows that once the crisis hits and the normalization begins, the tolerance and pluralism we take for granted disappear in an instant. In the Guthrie case, the conformity is a biological compliance.
We have to be the ones to break the spell. Bezmenov said that a demoralized person can't see the truth even if you show them a concentration camp. But I believe in the power of the conscious mind. I believe that if you can train yourself to think critically, you can push through the fog of a managed quote-unquote crisis. You can reclaim your perception.
We're not just giving you a news update. We're giving you a cognitive workout. We're showing you that genetic code of a lie can be decoded if you have the right tools and the willingness to look into the darkness.
The subverter wants you in the dark until it's too late. But tonight, Transition Radio is the light. We're holding it steady over Tucson, over Silver City, and over every heart monitor in this county and country. We are not going to be letting the normalization of this cage stand.
The 20th century was a century of the industrial lie, folks. It was the era where they perfected the art of the fake war and the stage execution. And we're going to show you every single gear in that machine before we're through. This is Transition Radio, and we are holding the line for the truth.
The genetic code is becoming a digital code, but the intent is the same. Don't look away, because that's when they make their move.
And we have the last vignette.
This is what they inherit. Quiet, efficient, and already decided before they learn the word choice.
It doesn't feel like control. It feels like being welcomed, because the doorway teaches compliance how to smile.
Is this mine?
It's shared. In the shared.
Shared means accessible to systems you will never meet, at times you won't notice, for reasons never explained.
And once it's shared, it never becomes private again. It only becomes permanent.
They won't remember agreeing, because nothing about it ever feels like a decision.
By the time they question it, the world will answer. There was never another way.
And that is how it lasts, by arriving early, sounding reasonable, and becoming childhood itself.
The article mentions how the 1619 Project and critical race theory are seen by some of the parts of the demoralization. It's about reframing the national narrative to focus on the failures rather than the principles. If you can make a nation ashamed of its past, you can make them indifferent to its future.
And we counter that by protecting the foundation. The foundation of this country is the sovereignty of the individual. If we lose that, we lose everything.
Yeah.
Whether the threat is coming from an external subverter or an internal bureaucrat, the defense is the same. Absolute transparency from the government and absolute privacy for the citizen.
It's the only way to break Bezmenov's cycle. We refuse to be demoralized. We refuse to be destabilized. We see the crisis for what it is, and we reject the new normal. Transition Radio is the line in the sand. That is the world they are building. Transition Radio, a world where your very life is a matter of state security, a world where the subversion is complete because you no longer even remember what it felt like to be private. Bezmenov said that once the normalization stage is reached, the people are so broken that they actually begin to defend their own captors. And we're seeing that right now. They call it the surveillance convenience. They call it tracking protection.
But we aren't broken. We are the shield for the truth. We track our own lives to empower ourselves, not to feed the machine. And we are calling on you, the listeners in Silver City, Tucson, and across the world to recognize the genetic code of the lie before the normalization is final.
The deadline has passed, but the window for resistance is still open. Don't let them use Nancy Guthrie's name to buy your silence. Don't let them use cybersecurity to steal your biological soul. Hersey Ali reminded us that these Western values, quote unquote, were practiced for centuries before they were branded as ideas. They are in our blood.
So stay focused, keep your shields up. Closing the book on this deep dive, but the transition is just getting started. We'll be here every Tuesday and Thursday at 6:30 Mountain Time to keep the lights on in the labyrinth.
This is Mark Angelo Cummings.
And I'm Leonard Cummings.
Have a good night, folks. We love you, but remember to always love yourselves too. Good night.
Another journey's end, but the path is ever bright. Transition radio's call, guiding us through the night. For more stories untold. Transition Radio.